Pinocchio. In a quiet village tucked between rolling hills, Geppetto worked late into the night. His workshop was filled with the scent of pine and the soft ticking of a dozen clocks. With one final stroke of his blade, he finished the wooden boy. Geppetto sighed, wishing with all his heart that his creation could truly share his home. As the village slept, a soft blue light drifted through the open window. It danced across the room, landing gently on the wooden puppet. The blue fairy appeared, her presence turning the shadows into shades of sapphire. She saw Geppetto's kindness in the craftsmanship and decided to give the little wooden boy a spark of life. Pinocchio opened his eyes and blinked at the world for the first time. His movements were stiff, but his heart was full of wonder. Before he could explore, a small figure hopped into view. It was a cricket in a tiny suit, appointed by the fairy to be the boy's guide. Pinocchio's journey toward becoming real had finally begun. The next morning, the sun painted the village in gold. Geppetto waved goodbye, his eyes misty with joy, as he sent his boy to school. Pinocchio skipped down the path, feeling the wind against his wooden face. Everything was new and exciting. But the world outside the workshop was much bigger and more confusing than he ever imagined. Before Pinocchio reached the schoolhouse, a loud, booming voice caught his attention. It was Stromboli, a traveling showman with a theater made of painted wood and velvet curtains. The music was hypnotic, and the wooden puppets inside danced without any strings. Pinocchio watched, forgetting all about his father's instructions and the heavy books in his bag. Stromboli promised Pinocchio fame and sweets, leading him behind the heavy curtains. But the warmth of the stage quickly turned cold. The showman saw Pinocchio not as a boy, but as a treasure to be owned. Before Pinocchio could say a word, the heavy wooden door of a birdcage slammed shut, locking him away from the sunlight and his father. The theater wagon rattled down a bumpy road as the moon rose. Inside the cage, Pinocchio felt the weight of his mistake. He had traded his father's trust for a moment of wonder. As he began to cry, the air grew warm and blue light flickered through the cracks of the wagon. The blue fairy appeared once more, watching him with a quiet, knowing gaze. Panicked and ashamed, Pinocchio began to make up stories about where he had been. With every lie, a strange sensation tickled his face. His wooden nose began to stretch, growing longer and longer until it sprouted small green leaves. The cricket watched in horror as the physical evidence of Pinocchio's dishonesty filled the small space of the cage. The fairy warned him that lies are easily seen, but she decided to give him one last chance. With a wave of her hand, the cage door unlocked, and his nose returned to its original shape. Pinocchio scrambled out of the wagon, landing on the soft grass of the forest. He promised to head straight home, but the shadows of the woods felt deep and unfamiliar. As Pinocchio hurried through the mist, the forest seemed to his name. He wanted to find Geppetto, but the path kept twisting in circles. Every shadow looked like a reaching hand, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. He realized that being brave was much harder when he was all alone in the middle of the deep, dark woods. Pinocchio finally reached the edge of the woods, only to find the vast, roaring sea. On the sand, he found a discarded tool, one of Geppetto's wood-carving knives. He realized his father had come looking for him and had been lost to the waves. A deep, heavy sadness filled his wooden chest, a feeling more real than any magic he had ever seen. Determined to save the only person who ever loved him, Pinocchio dove into the cold, salty water. He wasn't a strong swimmer, and his wooden body bobbed awkwardly on the surface. The cricket clung to Pinocchio's hat, shouting encouragement over the roar of the storm. They headed toward the horizon, searching for any sign of Geppetto's small fishing boat. The world suddenly went dark as a massive shadow rose from the deep. A giant whale, Monstro, swallowed Pinocchio and his raft in a single, terrifying gulp. Inside the whale's belly, it was like a graveyard of forgotten ships. Amidst the rotting wood and murky water, Pinocchio saw a faint, flickering light, the tiny lantern of a lonely fisherman. Geppetto could hardly believe his eyes when the wooden boy climbed onto his boat. He had spent days in the darkness, losing hope of ever seeing his creation again. They held each other tight, the cold dampness of the whale forgotten in the warmth of their reunion. But the giant beast groaned, reminding them that they were still trapped in its belly. Pinocchio knew they had to act fast. He gathered the driest wood he could find from the shipwrecks and piled it high. If he could create enough smoke, the whale would be forced to sneeze. It was a dangerous plan, but Pinocchio was no longer the frightened puppet who ran away. He was a son trying to save his father. The smoke billowed into thick, dark clouds, filling the whale's massive lungs. Monstro began to stir, his giant body shuddering with the urge to cough. Geppetto gripped the sides of the boat, his face pale with fear. But Pinocchio stood tall. He watched the rafters of the whale's mouth, waiting for the one moment they might be blasted back into the sea. With a sneeze that sounded like a mountain exploding, the whale ejected them into the churning ocean. The boat was smashed to splinters by the force. Geppetto, exhausted and weak, began to sink beneath the white foam. Pinocchio didn't hesitate. He grabbed his father, kicking his wooden legs with all his might, fighting the tide to reach the distant, rocky shore. The storm passed, leaving the world in a soft, gray silence. Geppetto crawled onto the sand for air and pulled Pinocchio's body from the surf. The wooden boy was still, his joints locked and his paint faded by the salt. Geppetto, cradling the puppet in his arms, heartbroken that his son had given everything just to bring him home. As the first rays of the sun touched the shore, a soft blue glow enveloped the beach. The blue fairy appeared, her light warmer and brighter than ever before. She looked down at the wooden boy who had sacrificed himself for love. With a gentle whisper, she declared that his bravery and truthfulness had finally proven him worthy of the gift of life. Pinocchio took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on real skin. He was no longer a puppet. He was a real boy. Hand in hand, he and Geppetto walked back to their village, where the workshop awaited them. They had faced the ocean and the shadows, finding that the strongest magic of all was simply being home together. The cricket watched from the window, a small smile on his face. His job was done, but he knew his friendship with the boy would last a lifetime. In the heart of the workshop, the ticking of the clocks sounded like a steady heartbeat. Pinocchio's journey had been long, but he had finally found exactly where he was meant to be.